And welcome back to Capitol Tonight. With schools facing nearly $3 billion in proposed budget cuts the next fiscal year, there has been a lot of talk about reforming the system as a whole. We saw some of that today with the governor's proposed cap on superintendents' salaries. Another plan out there calls for eliminating the policy known as last in, first out, which projects the longest-serving teachers, even if they might not be the best performing. My next guest has a bill that would actually do away with this. Republican Senator John Flanagan's bill is slated to be voted on tomorrow in the Education Committee. He's joining us now from the Capitol to talk more about the measure. Senator, how are you?
I'm doing well, thank you.
So first of all, this is something that Mayor Bloomberg, the New York City mayor, has been pushing very hard. You are not a New York City senator. You're out on the island. What caused you to take up this bill?
Well, I've spoken to the chancellor of the city schools. I've spoken to the mayor. I do chair the Senate Education Committee, and even though I am from Long Island, certainly all of our respective job titles are state senator. When kids in the city of New York do well, that's good for Long Island, it's good for Plattsburgh, for Rome, Utica, Buffalo. So it's certainly not an issue isolated only to the city of New York, but I would agree with you that the mayor has advanced this issue very aggressively.
Well, and it should be said, this is not just the Mayor Bloomberg's issue. It is actually an issue that some upstate school superintendents are talking about as well. I mean, in short, what this would do, as I mentioned, is really give more unilateral ability or more freedom for districts to fire based on merit and not based on seniority, which is not something that unions like at all. Is that correct?
No, I don't agree, because there are basically, here's a couple of things in the bill that are extremely important. Number one, if the city and the UFT sit down and negotiate a separate collective bargaining agreement, the bill becomes a moot point. They have that power, which is an inherent power, and it's something I very strongly believe in, despite some of the protestations out there by the unions. They can sit down today, negotiate an agreement, and then the elements of the bill don't take effect. Independent of that, we set up 9 different categories of teachers who would have to be let go first, and then after that, the provision kicks in, which does not repeal seniority if it modifies it and says it cannot be the only consideration. So it doesn't get rid of it. It just says it cannot be the only consideration. I think there's a vast difference.
So when you say you've set up 9 categories, and I've
Right.
seen them, but if you would just go through, say, a couple of them, the most pertinent ones, if you would.
Yeah, the first category is what's known as the U rating. Those are teachers who've got an unsatisfactory rating in one of the last 5 years. There are about 2,700 teachers in that category based on data provided by the City of New York. And I will tell you that that provision, while people may complain about it, all the components and all the evaluation and all the criteria that go in making that determination were collectively bargained by the union and the city. And in the last 5 years, even with all the changes, including mayoral control, about 2.3% of all teachers in the City of New York fall into that category. So it's not as if it's 40 to 50% of the teachers that are out there. And that is one component. We have things in relation to 3028 proceedings, which are disciplinary hearings. These are people who have been found guilty of some professional misconduct, but they're still on the payroll. We have a provision for criminal charges, people who've been convicted of a crime like sexual assault, kidnapping, Class A misdemeanors, felonies, strong negative behavioral contact in relation to the criminal law.
These would be people who are actually employed as teachers, employed by the school system who have a criminal, right, okay.
Correct, and these are not just, it's not people that have just been charged. These are people who have been found guilty or have pled guilty to some things that are actually quite nasty, frankly.
Senator, I'd like you to take a look at what the AFL-CIO has to say about this today. Now, in fact, the AFL-CIO, in case people are not aware, it's an umbrella organization for unions. And so, what they say specifically is they're making a connection between the Wisconsin model of politics and what's going on here in New York. Now, let's remember what's going on in Wisconsin that's causing all of this upset is that Scott Walker, who is a Republican governor in Wisconsin, has proposed getting rid of collective bargaining for many public employees. You have been quite clear, you've said collective bargaining, I think twice at least during this interview so far, that that's not what you see this effort as.
No, because and I'm going to keep saying this is a good faith effort to get some things done. People may disagree with the categories, but again, the UFT and the city, the United Federation of Teachers and the city, can sit down, come to their own agreement. We set up parameters so that the regions, the Board of Regents, may have to institute regulations, and there are components therein that have to be collectively bargained. To compare this to Wisconsin, I think, is not only inappropriate, it's apples and oranges. And by the way, I have great respect for Dennis Hughes and the AFL-CIO. I have great respect for the advocacy he does on behalf of working men and women. I consider myself a principled, strong supporter of the labor movement. And I know some people say, well, how could you be saying that and putting in a bill like this? This, to me, changes the whole dynamic and says that you cannot only have seniority as the sole consideration. And before we even get to that, we put together a whole series of categories that, you know, the people in those categories, most of the teachers who are there now would agree that these folks shouldn't be there. There's, for example, there's about 300 people in the category for chronic lateness and absenteeism. I can't even believe that we have to have a discussion about something like that. If a teacher can't get to school and that continues to be a problem, to me, it's ridiculous that we would have to change a state law to be able to address something like that.
But so if Dennis Hughes says something like, and this part we unfortunately don't have for the screen, so I'm going to read it. This bill is the result of a lengthy and coordinated campaign against the rights and benefits of all workers over the last several years, particularly against the rights and benefits of public employees. I mean, certainly, to play devil's advocate, public employees feel like they're put upon, teachers and also, of course, state workers. So your response to him in this particular instance would be what?
A couple of different things. First of all, ultimately this is supposed to be about children and children in the city of New York and their education and the students. Teachers are the most important component therein, but ultimately it's about the students. Having said that, this should be viewed as part of an overall larger context in which we have to take a critical review and new look at every single thing that we do, not just for the city, not just for the counties, towns, and villages, but for the entire state. So I don't think any one thing in isolation should be done and use that as the only thing. We need to do economic development. This is about taxes, jobs, and spending. Taxes, jobs, and spending. And when we look at this, do I want to see layoffs? No, but we have a $10 billion deficit, and if we can find a system that still allows for the appropriate collective bargaining, but say these are the people who should be going first, based on long processes that have found them guilty or inappropriate in certain teaching settings or based on certain behavior that they've exhibited.
Senator, I should note that before I preface what I'm about to say, that 85% of New Yorkers, according to a recent Quinnipiac poll, said that they actually support the idea that you're talking about, that you would make decisions based on merit for laying people off and not based on simply how long a person has been in the system. They support public school teachers, generally speaking, writ large, but they do not support unions per se that those teachers belong to. However, I mean, the person who's carrying this bill in the Assembly, I believe, is Assemblyman Bing. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. He's a Manhattan Democrat. You are a Long Island Republican.
Correct.
Just not to belabor this point, but Mayor Bloomberg gave close to $1 million to support the Senate Republicans winning back the majority in the Senate. Last fall, you had Assemblyman Bing have a primary from actually a UFT member, a teacher, a unionized teacher, and he had Mayor Bloomberg's support politically. So you could say that this looks a little like a favor to the mayor, does it not?
I had a couple of conversations with the mayor over the last 10 days. Prior to that, I've had no conversations with him on this subject. People are going to draw the conclusions that they want. I don't think there's any parallel whatsoever. And this is my bill. I didn't have to put this bill in. I did it because I thought it was the right thing to do to advance this whole discussion. And I'll go back. The mayor has stepped out way in front on this, and he's talking about the loss of 6,000 positions, 1,500 through attrition, and 4,500 layoffs.
Right.
I would be shirking my responsibility, as we all would as members of the legislature, if we didn't take a look at that and say, how are we going to fix that? I mean, we've taken a position, and we're not going to tax our way out of this problem, because what we really have is a spending problem and a taxing problem. So we need to take a hard look, and if that means we have to make difficult decisions and change the nature of the debate fundamentally, I believe that that's what the public is expecting. And you, Liz, you brought up the poll. I didn't bring it up. 85% of the people support this. That's somewhat telling. I mean, the governor right now enjoys a 77% approval rating. I thought that was high until I saw the poll.
So now, just in closing here, to look ahead to tomorrow, as we mentioned, this bill is coming up for a vote in the Senate Education Committee. You expect that it's possible that it'll actually come to the floor for a full Senate vote, and do you expect it'll pass?
Yes, those are my expectations, but this is Albany, so anything can happen.
That's a good point.
We will be going to committee tomorrow. We'll go to the Rules Committee once it leaves the Education Committee, and my expectation is that we will see this bill on the floor tomorrow.
And the governor, of course, has said, just recently, actually, last week, said, quote, I think a better system than last in, first out, a seniority-based system, is a system based on merit As far as things moving in the Assembly, where the teachers union has been quite strong, do you have any update on that?
No, Assemblyman Bing has put in the bill that we have, and he put in the amendments. And let me quickly add that there are components in this bill that have been changed based on the concerns that have been raised. We made much greater specificity on what the criminal convictions could be for someone's release. We changed the whole dynamic about how teachers would be evaluated and put in a lot more protection so that you can't just throw somebody out the door. We looked at free and reduced lunch programs. We looked at student enrollment with special education, English language learners. So there's a whole litany of things that we've done even since the discussion started to help make the bill better. And I'm not going to apologize for that. We have taken a strong principled position that ultimately this is supposed to be about the students and the kids in the city of New York. And if it transcends beyond that and it has a positive benefit to other communities and parts of the state, then I think that's something we should be embracing, not criticizing.
Okay, Senator, we will be catching up tomorrow with this issue, and we'll see if it actually indeed passes and comes to the floor. I want to thank you, John Flanagan, for joining us tonight.
Thank you.